Sabrina 2000s comic, issue 14. The story starts out with Hilda and Zelda saying goodbye to Aunt Edna as she's driving away in an old jalopy. Unfortunately, Hilda says that she's gonna see her when she comes back. The earlier comics just showed us Sabrina's other relatives right away, expending the creativity to tell us what they're like, instead of making us impatient for it twice. Zelda tells Sabrina to come see who Edna left with them. Oh no, another brat. It's her second cousin Rusty, who usually spends winters with Edna, but she was called away. And somehow I'm expected to believe he doesn't have magical powers yet. This has to be a curse on all of the witches made by powerful witches gathering together thousands of years ago, because realistically, if magic is inherited, you'd be born with it. Your magic battery wouldn't just show up after a couple of years out of nowhere. Oh, I remember this story. Rusty's that stupid orange-haired asshole who reads her diary in front of her for the evils and does have magical powers. He broke a rule established in the series right after it was introduced. Do they think he's supposed to have them any minute now? Why would he be so stupid as to proudly read her diary in front of her instead of trying to hide it and erase her memory of it? Already he's impossible to relate to, and I just want to see him get what he deserves. It's just a mean story so far. I don't care that Edna was called away, it doesn't explain why he isn't with her. Unless she just hates him that much. Instead of using magic, Sabrina jumps up and grabs Rusty. And now here's another reason why I remember hating this cunt. His aunts don't know what's going on with her and totally buy that she's just picking on him, even though they should be trusting and siding with their daughter figure they know really well over him, who's practically a stranger. Obviously, she won't attack him for no reason. I just realized, why doesn't Sabrina use a spell or look up a spell that'll show what Rusty was actually doing in her room? Well, she could have just as easily shown a fake video, but come on, these ants are really aggravating me. It makes sense that they don't know what's happening, but their loyalty is really misplaced. You can still have drama, you can still have Rusty doing bad things. You don't have to have her ants be turned against her. She tells them that he took her diary, which she was a complete idiot for having in the first place, when she could have just, warped it to the moon whenever she didn't want people to find it. And it turns out Rusty used magic to put the diary back on the dresser. So she's forced to start from scratch with him with a hug. Or she could use magic to frame him. The ants walk out of the room, and I immediately wonder why she doesn't freeze him in time with magic for the entire story as long as they are in the room. This writer is forgetting that Sabrina's a witch. She could warp him to a hell dimension for a bit, like the Misery Zone. She has to unpack his things by herself, as I wonder why she doesn't cast a spell on him to force him to do it. Sabrina's being impossible to relate to in this story, because magic is wasted on her. Because Sabrina doesn't tell Salem what Rusty did to her recently, when Salem's supposed to be her friend, Salem aggravatingly gets befriended by Rusty right away because he asks about a sports team that they coincidentally both root for. I didn't know Greendale was in Detroit. Can this character just die already? I don't want him in the story, and nobody does. He shows off an autographed football as Salem has horribly boring dialogue I had to force myself to read. Sabrina says that he's only pretending to like the Lions because Salem's a cat, and warns him that he's just trying to take him away from her. Salem should sympathize with her at this point because he knows exactly how it feels to be afraid of Sabrina being taken away from him by Emerson. Instead, he ignores her because the tone of the story is complete garbage and just wants to piss off the audience the entire time. There's such a thing as making a character too unlikable. Even a criminal is fine compared to Rusty because he's not framing a good person and being seen as a victim. Sabrina says that they're not supposed to use magic until they're older. Considering that Sabrina's been told to only use magic as a last resort, that rule might as well have not changed for her. Then, because Sabrina didn't rob him of his powers, Rusty turns her into an ant. Logically, her aunts would find her as an ant because she'd eventually go up to them. But what if they don't know it's Sabrina? He could get her killed. Considering what unlikable dunces her aunts are, they could come to the conclusion that Sabrina turned herself into an ant on purpose to frame him to try to get him kicked out of the house. My point was, Rusty shouldn't have even risked it. Zelda never even notices that the ant is Sabrina, even though her head is clearly shaped like Sabrina's. So I assumed she noticed right away, while Hilda didn't. Instead, Zelda warps Sabrina to the backyard while Rusty's playing football. After saying a line I always remembered as a kid. She called Hilda, "Miss If It Moves, Smash It." I guess I'm supposed to assume that Sabrina doesn't actually have her head look like that as an ant, because otherwise her aunt would have known it was her. So the artist just thinks we're complete idiots. Am I also supposed to assume that she doesn't have her powers? Because if she had her powers, she'd have immediately turned herself back to normal and gotten revenge on that cunt. Salem's about to squeeze her when Hilda calls out that it's supper time. Wait, I heard that calling dinner supper was just a Canadian thing. I guess it's not. Rusty lies that Sabrina told him to bug off, and I want him kicked out of the comic even more. Every time I see this shitty character, it makes me so angry that I have to force myself to read the dialogue. I'm reading it as fast as I can get away with. Cousin Esmeralda was a saint compared to him. This is the worst execution of the bratty kid cousin cliche that Sabrina has ever done. There was no reason to even do this because it was done before. Sabrina's already had to babysit a kid who was a warlock, twice. Sabrina gets back inside through the window, which conveniently is right in front of a book of witchcraft, which is open already. How convenient. How in the world does Sabrina need to look up a spell in the book and say it to turn herself back to normal? Why the fuck didn't she just imagine herself as the way she used to be and point? This is not an act of magic so complicated that she'd have to say a spell. Even if it was, she would have thought of 2 lines of a spell herself, which Sabrina did in the earlier comics constantly. She turns back to normal and screams in the basement, crashing. And because she was caught using the magic book, which is inexplicably forbidden now when she still has to do magic homework, she's immediately sent to bed without dinner, which is something that the 70s cartoon had Hilda do, and I thought it was just something that happened in the 70s, because it'd be considered abusive now. So how did the writer think he could get away with this? She runs away crying as the worthless sociopath smiles, and quickly the piece of shit apologizes to him for seeing this. Zelda, the piece of shit, doesn't even let her explain. It would take 1 second for her to look at the page she was at in the book. This just makes me wish the series was like Rick and Morty or AOSDH, so that Rusty could get the full extent of slapstick he deserves. Instead, he's stuck in a comic that's too gutless to do that, but is still taking itself too seriously by having a story that's nothing but mean-spirited drama. So, I can't imagine that anything could possibly make him miserable enough to make up for that shitstorm. This one panel was worse than Sally slapping Sonic. Rusty gets tricked by the smell of cookies into grabbing the spooky jar. Why didn't this happen a scene ago? I'd rather see Sabrina beat him up, because she's the one he wronged. Oh no, she's just a weak little girl with the design of a harmless kid. She has to get spooky to fight her battles for. And all he's gonna do is take him on a tour of the damp, dark netherworld where there's a spot reserved for those who use magic to bully girls. But we don't get to see that, because that would be remotely good writing. What a piece of shit excuse for a story. No words can truly express how vile this story is. This is easily the worst Sabrina story in the history of the universe. At least until the horrible, much later comics. Rusty just might be the worst character of all time. At least his design isn't horrible, like Chip or Cassia, but it's still bad. And his personality makes it horrible. I don't give a shit what his age is. I'd rather see him fall down a hill, fall into a bunch of tree branches on his way home. Looney Tunes give characters slapstick as comeuppance. The whole story was building up to him getting punished, and the punishment was off screen. The worst part is, there's no indication that the ants apologized to Sabrina after Rusty explained everything he did to the ants. Instead, he watches a show with a clown in it while saying that he's a good boy. They're letting him watch TV after all of this. The story destroyed my sympathy for the ants for a while, and they don't do anything to make up for it. Neither does Rusty. Why the fuck did we see Hilda talking to Edna on the phone without us seeing the other end of the conversation instead of any kind of proper resolution? This wasn't unnecessary roughness. I don't know what happens to him. So why should I feel sorry for him or be satisfied? What kind of parents send their kids to bed without dinner in the 2000s anyways? It seems like abusive ones who don't care if they get the proper nutrition. I mean, one missed supper isn't gonna kill you, but it still implies that they don't actually care about you. Was there no other punishment that she could think of? I know she's been around for a long time, but that's not okay. The story doesn't even show us Edna and develop her character finally, even though it was clearly said that Sabrina would see her. And since we've been shown continuity in this comic, I don't even trust the comic to have him just be a one-shot character. I don't know why Sabrina didn't depower him. I don't know why she didn't tell her aunts to look in a crystal ball to see what Rusty was actually doing to her. I don't know why they didn't do that, just to check. This might be the worst Sabrina story I've ever experienced, and I actually have it. In the next story, Sabrina watches the non-stop shopping channel's holiday special, where they're selling collectible dolls. Salem thinks it's boring and just wants to see the collectible mice. If he's bored, why doesn't he do something fun? He just warp away and nap somewhere quiet. Ooh, the story's by Angelo DeCesare. He worked on Archie Sonic too. Now I remember him being slightly better than Gallagher. Sabrina wishes she had a rare redhead doll. This story seems a bit familiar. So, once a witch making a wish grant that wish for herself, even by accident? That was shown off constantly in the first issue of the 90s comic. It would take advantage of Sabrina being a witch if she zapped this doll up by accident. Salem even suggests it. And she says she can't do that because it's wrong. Anti-heroes are much more creative as the main character because you expect the main character to be portrayed as the perfect role model of goodness for the kiddies. Sabrina doesn't even explain why zapping up a perfect copy would be wrong. She should at least explain that it's no different from pirating music instead of buying it. Even then, that's a very petty definition of wrong. What's so good about being a witch if you won't ever take advantage of it? She also says that she promised her witch aunts that she wouldn't use witchcraft during the holidays. Why don't they remove her powers, instead of blindly trusting her during the holidays when clearly they don't? Sabrina's aunts ask why she's in bed. Zelda laughs for no reason when saying that it's past witching hour, and yet she still hates her witchcraft. Salem decides to zap a doll through the TV screen and get it to himself as a holiday gift. He mentioned the idea of Sabrina zapping up a perfect copy of the doll. So logically, he would have done that. Not literally stolen the doll from the show and gotten the hosts to immediately accuse each other of stealing it for themselves. I guess they have a ton of problems with each other, and this was just an excuse to start fighting over them. If they were actually on good terms, they would have tried to figure out who actually stole the doll. Or they would have tried to figure out why the other person stole the doll and offered to give her money if she needed the cash that badly. Somehow, the idiotic Sabrina assumes that the doll didn't disappear thanks to his spell, and decides to go to bed right away. The doll didn't disappear from the show until literally a panel after he cast that spell. You'd think he would have seen it disappear on the show. But I guess the camera wasn't showing it at the time. But once the show's cameraman have seen it get teleported away, these two wouldn't believe him though. And there was no excuse whatsoever for Patty to be able to talk and want to party. Salem didn't want that, so he wouldn't have imagined it in the spell. And it'd obviously be better for Sabrina to have summoned Patty, because that'd make her a relatable kid, because any kid would want to do that. And it would have saved us some padding. I see this writer isn't even trying with Sabrina either. So already the story's complete crap and can be written off completely. I'm only reading the stories after turning points like this because I'm reviewing the Sabrina series. I don't even know why the doll knocked on the door instead of just being warped straight to Salem right after he cast the spell. Which logic would dictate he would imagine to happen and be confused if it didn't. Sabrina's magic problems are supposed to be caused by her sympathetic attempts to use magic to help people backfiring on her. Apparently, if they try to remove that because it made her look stupid, she continues looking stupid. And the plots get even worse because without that, the series is completely out of good ideas. Instead of breaking the fourth wall for no reason and talking, Salem would have just frozen Patty in time and avoided the entire plot. There wasn't even a reason for him to see the commercial, because he would have just warped to Sabrina's room to sleep in her bed. I don't even really want to read this story because I hate it so much. The entire plot became predictable after she said she wanted to party. so she does so. Somehow Sabrina asks her aunts for help in sending Patty back where she came from, because she's too much of a drooling idiot to just undo the spell herself, when imagining it would be as easy as remembering seeing the doll for the first time. At least establish that the animated series Sabrina doesn't have magical powers at all. You know, maybe that would have been less frustrating. And the story ends with Sabrina's aunt buying her the actual doll and her thanking them, which would have had more impact if I knew how expensive it was, and whether spending that money was any kind of a big deal to their finances. Salem wouldn't have run at Patty. He would have remembered he's a witch and killed her with a single point. The story's stupid. In the next story, Sabrina says that she has nothing to do on her winter holiday break and nowhere to go. Oh, thank God, Chloe's in the story. She wishes it would snow, but the Snow Channel said that it's going to be sunny all week. I'm guessing that Sabrina, despite being a witch, won't even make it snow in a very small area, so small that there's no reason nature should take umbrage with it and punish her. Sure, it's realistic that she wouldn't be allowed to do everything she wants, but it's supposed to be a series about a witch. And Jem shows up in her limo to taunt them because she only exists to be mean to the main character for the writer for no reason. She says that she can't take them on a ski trip because the ski lodge doesn't allow lowlifes. Why would she think of them as lowlifes? I have a question. Why doesn't Sabrina brainwash her to make her change her mind? For once, Sabrina decides to use magic, wanting to bring the snow to her. Oh, she somehow thinks that she needs Spooky to help her. This would make sense if she explained to us that her aunt casts a spell that monitors every use of her magic. Harvey snowboards with her and Chloe on a snowy hill, and that's why it's only snowing around her house. Because she didn't even make it snow in all of Greendale, which was the obvious thing to do to make it not be suspicious. Why didn't Sabrina tell Spooky to only have it snow until there's enough snow for her to snowboard, and then make the snowing stop? Of course, Harvey would still question why there's only snow in her backyard, but she could tell him that she had snow shipped over to it, I guess. Her house was said to be a mansion. Isn't it a Victorian mansion, even in the sitcom, in the 70s cartoon? She could say her aunts have the money. Sabrina lies that's one of those slow-moving storms, and Harvey totally buys it. As I wonder why Chloe didn't tell her to only make it snow until there was enough snow for a hill. Better yet, why didn't she just tell Sabrina to point and zap up a bunch of snow? Why didn't Sabrina think to do that herself? I remember saying multiple times in the 70s comic that Sabrina was being surprisingly smart. This just reflects badly on both of those girls, who should have had a better lie prepared in case Harvey questioned this. Which of course he would. If she wanted to avoid any consequences, why didn't she have it snow in the park? Then the snow would be away from the prying eyes of her aunt and uncle who want to spoil literally all of the fun she tries to have, whether it inconveniences someone or not. This comic makes me wish Sabrina would have moved to the other realm. Logically, she'd move there eventually just to spite her aunts. Now I'm wondering if the spell is going to be forced to backfire for the sake of the conflict, when realistically Sabrina would just point and turn the spell off, or ask Spooky to do that. There's no reason for her to keep the spell on now that she's done snowboarding for the day. Instead, after she wants to read a book indoors, the snow cloud follows her into the house, when I'm pretty sure it was obvious that she only wanted to snow outdoors. Somehow, the cloud doesn't listen to her and go outside, and it even followed her in the first place for no reason. Because magic is bad. And the drooling, blithering idiot is too intellectually challenged to just point and get rid of it. How can anybody be this stupid? She thinks she'll have to ask the spooky jar to undo the spell. I wonder how many times she'll be a damsel in distress in this comic. You don't have to be kidnapped to count as that. It feels so spiteful of the writing to have even this backfire on her. She literally can't get away with nothing. She just wanted to go snowboarding. I suppose she could have warped to a snowboarding hill. She sees that the spooky jar has a note on it saying that Spooky's gone skiing and will be back in 5 days because padding. And then instead of Sabrina warping Spooky to her, she doesn't do that because she's a moron. Such a moron that she can't just zap the cloud away. She thinks of zapping herself to a hiding place instead of zapping the cloud to one. The cloud, of course, finds her in the closet. It's not like Spooky has anything against Sabrina. There's no reason he would want this to happen to her. So how could it possibly have happened with all of his experience with magic? A lot of the problems with magic would only make sense if it was an actual witch antagonist intentionally casting a spell to make Sabrina miserable. Even then, there's no reason she couldn't just zap the problem away. Unless the spell was locked by her antagonist. But that makes sense. Even among just the animated series, there's still so many things Sabrina's been able to do with magic. There's no reason she wants to be so incompetent. She's able to conjure up an escape-proof box, but can't get rid of a snow cloud. It turns out she lured the snow cloud into a vacuum. I should have seen her vacuum it up at least. She puts it in reverse to put the cloud in the box and mails it to Jem. Because simply warping it to her right away would be illogical. Whatever happened to simply having magic backfire because of the realistic consequences of a spell? Sure, that made Sabrina look stupid for not thinking about those consequences beforehand, but she's a teenage girl. Of course she'd impulsively use magic without thinking ahead. Jem asks for a snow plow to be sent to her room right now, and the story ends without her trying to explain what she thinks of that snow cloud's origin. Would she blame it on demons? People would be more likely to blame magic on them than witches. Wouldn't this lead to her becoming fanatical and trying to warn people about demons? Good thing that doesn't happen. The first story, by Mike Gallagher, was a frustrating plot with the most unlikable kid cousin in the history of the series. There was no logical reason for him not to erase Sabrina's memory of him reading her diary and hide the fact that he did, and there was no reason for him to try to frame her instead. He's just a spiteful monster for no reason, who, worst of all, turns her own aunts against her when they should side with her over a complete stranger. Since when do they assume she's a violent liar? He almost got her killed. And he never apologizes and explains what he did, and the aunts never apologize, and nobody makes up for anything. We should have seen him in hell, not just seen Spooky fly away with him. He should have gotten slapstick. Somehow her aunts didn't even let her explain why she used the magic book, which logically she wouldn't have even needed at all. Because even a 2-year-old would know how to imagine themselves properly and stop being an aunt. Why the hell was this ending and story approved? We never even get to know Aunt Edna. I wanted to see Sabrina get back at him, not Spooky. You'd think Sabrina's aunts would use a crystal ball to see if Sabrina was lying or not, and see why she fell on the magic book. If Rusty's so evil, you'd think he'd be written to brainwash. So it could have been explained that he was only brainwashing her aunts to be like that. Why didn't he just do that? The rest of the issue was by Angelo DeCesare. The second story was complete nonsense, where because Sabrina refuses to zap up a doll she wanted on TV because she unrealistically says it's wrong without bothering to explain why, of course Salem does it, and somehow the doll talks and wants to party, and didn't get zapped up to directly in front of him, when Salem didn't want that. This plot would make as much sense as a story where Sabrina would zap up some food just for a giant talking ice cream cone to show up and drag her to the pits of hell. That'd make just as much sense and be just as in line with the spitefulness of the series. Portraying magic as always bad just makes it look like her life is cursed, and she'd be better off as a mortal. The final trash story was about Sabrina somehow thinking she needs to ask Spooky to generate a snow cloud to give her backyard some snow to snowboard on, instead of just zapping up snow herself without making it snow, when we know for a fact that she can zap stuff up. And the snow cloud follows her into the house for no reason, when it had no reason to have any sentience. And Spooky went on a skiing trip, so instead of Sabrina warping him home, at least now she gets to take action. She vacuums the snow cloud up, rather than just zapping it away. At least that was creative. And she sends it to Jem by mail. That's nice at least. But you'd think all that snow would reveal magic. I guess spy witches and the Witches' Council don't bother erasing magical evidence if the mortal blames it on demons. It would have been better if Rusty was the one who was bothered at the end, and not Jem.